How could it be that for 33 years, I've lived my life in an area where there are 9 Palestinians for each Israeli, and I'd never met even one Palestinian? How could that be? I want to tell you the story of how that could be. It's to a large degree the story of my life. It's a roller coaster. There's going to be a lot of hairpin turns. Be prepared for the unexpected. So I will throw out 3 labels that can be used to describe me. I'm a Jew, and I'm a Zionist, and I'm a settler. 3 minutes for each of those terms. When I say I'm a Jew, I have to make it really clear that though it's true that there's such a thing as the Jewish religion, and I'm a religious person, but when I describe myself as a Jew, I'm not primarily saying that I'm connected to the Jewish faith. What I'm saying is that I'm part of the Jewish people. We are a nation, the Jewish nation, and we go back 3,000 years to chapter 12 of the Bible when God called upon Abraham and Sarah and said, leave your land, leave where you were born, and go forth to the land I will show you, and there I'll make of you a great nation, and I'll give you that promised land to you and your descendants for all eternity. Abraham and Sarah went. They got to the land that God showed them. It turns out to be the land of Canaan, what we call today the land of Israel. And whether we like it or not, politically correct or uncomfortable, the Jewish people's identity is that we're connected to that particular real estate in the past, in the present, and in the future. When I talk about the past, present, and future, I have to get it across to you that all of those 3 way stations, past, present, and future, are part of who I am. My birth certificate says that I was born in 1957, but I wasn't. I was born 3,000 years ago, because all of these stages in Jewish history are part of who I am. I have a sense that I have an expanded collective identity, not just as an individual. Jew is who I am. All the different stages in Jewish history, I was there. And not only in the past, in the present, but also in the future. I'm not going to die tomorrow, another 30 years. In a certain sense, I will live as long as the Jewish people will be on this earth, because that's part of who I am. Then I said I'm a Zionist. Well, today about 90% of Jews, at least those over 30, consider themselves to be Zionists, but each Jew has a different definition of what that means. For me, a Zionist is a Jew who deeply understands that at the beginning of the 19th century, and since then, the opportunity has been presented to us Jewish people to reconsummate our connection to our ancient homeland, the land of Israel. Because for the past 2,000 years, since the Romans exiled us and destroyed our temple and our monarchy in the year 70 of the Common Era, we have been in exile in Northern Africa, in the Middle East, in Europe. And we've been in exile not just physically, demographically, we've been in exile existentially. What I mean to say is that most Jews until the modern era had the sense that in exile, it's not the real thing. It's not the way Jews were meant to live their life. It's just like we're on hold. We're in suspended animation. We're waiting until we can come back to the land where we can be what we're supposed to be, which is not just practitioners of Jewish religion, but members, citizens of the Jewish nation, a sovereign state in our ancient homeland. You probably hear that my English is pretty good. I wasn't born in Israel. I was born in New York. But when I was 18, I picked up my bags and I made Aliyah, which means I ascended to the Holy Land, because I had a sense that that's where I had to be. That my being a Jew in New York was not the full sense of what I was created to be. I had a sense that the Jewish people are the stars in a motion picture that was filmed and has always been filmed only in the land of Israel. And then 2,000 years ago, I guess the budget ran out, they pressed the hold button, they haven't been filming for the past 2,000 years. The movie has been waiting, and then in my generation, they started filming again, and I was called upon to be a major player, a major character in that movie called Jewish Destiny. And how could I not pick up my bags and go to the Holy Land where that movie is being filmed? And my deep sense is that we Jews in the Holy Land, are now writing the next page in the Bible. It's alive, it's real, it's powerful. And then, after I talked about myself as a Jew and a Zionist, I'm a settler. Here's the map on the screen. In geographical terms, a settler is a Jewish Israeli who lives in the West Bank. You can see Israel in something like orange, basically coastal land. Hadera, Netanya, Herzliya, Tel Aviv, Ashdod, and then the West Bank going to your right, in blue there. So a settler is a Jewish Israeli who lives in the West Bank, what's called over the Green Line. The Green Line separates the West Bank from Israel on the coast, Israel of 1948 to 1967. When I say to audiences that I'm a settler, in some cases, perhaps in many cases, it arouses great opposition. It sounds like I'm making a radical political statement. I understand that. But my intention in telling you I'm a settler and being a settler is not to make a political statement, it's to make a historical statement. I'll explain that in a minute. I'll explain that after I dig my grave even deeper and tell you not only am I a settler, but the land I live in, which this map calls the West Bank, and others called occupied territory or Palestine, I call it something else. I call it Judea and Samaria, Judah and Shomron, Yudah v'Shomron. For some, it sounds like when I say that, I'm making an even more radical, dangerous, religious, extremist statement. But my intention, again, is to make a historical statement. I call it what I call it because that's what the Bible calls it. It's been called Judea and Samaria for 2,500 years. Samaria, look in the book of Samuel, look in the book of Kings. Samaria was the ancient Jewish kingdom, the first temple era north of Jerusalem. And south of Jerusalem was the ancient kingdom of Judea. I call it what the Bible calls it because I live there because of the Bible. I live there because of the historical continuity. The Jewish people were born in the West Bank. The book of Genesis did not take place in Tel Aviv. It took place in the West Bank, north and south of Jerusalem. And throughout the 1,000 years when the Jewish people lived in the land, we never made it to Tel Aviv, to the coast. That was the land of the Philistines. It's part of the biblical promised land. It's part of the state of Israel. But if you, I mean me, if I want to live where I have that sense of roots, of historical continuity, then I want to live where I live in Judea and Samaria. I particularly live in Judea, south of Jerusalem, in an area called Gush Etzion, in a little settlement of 600 families called Alon Shvut. Where I live, literally, I can walk outside my door, walk for 5 minutes, and come to a place where I scrape the ground with my heel and come up with potsherds, pottery that our ancestors left 2,000 years ago. That's the sense of being part of a chain. Historical chain of tradition. I can walk 10 minutes from my house and come to Patriarch's Way, an ancient Canaanite road from 3,000 years ago, going from north to south. That's the road that Abraham and Sarah walked upon. That's the road that all of the events described in the book of Genesis and other books of the Bible, that's where things happened. That's where Abraham walked with Isaac on his way to the binding of Isaac in Jerusalem, in Mount Moriah. Actually, they passed through my backyard as they were walking there over 3,000 years ago. To live near that path, to live with all of that Jewish history, to be able to learn Bible by walking outside with the Bible and seeing and feeling where things actually happened, that makes life real, meaningful, powerful. And my sense is that the power and righteousness of my Jewish Zionist narrative has blinded me my whole life to another story, the story of the Palestinians. For 33 years, I didn't see them. I didn't know they existed, even though they're 90% at least of the population of the era I live in Judea. But I was blind. The power of my religious, historical identity so enveloped me that it prevented me from seeing another story, another people, human beings who were in part of my tribe. It's like they were just part of the scenery, the gray, drab scenery that passes in the background, the landscape. But they weren't part of the story, because the story was only my story. And in January 2014, I began to become a different person, because for the first time in my life, I met a Palestinian as a human being. And it cracked open the shell, the wall that was surrounding me, and I was transformed. Before I tell you what happened to me, I want to give you some background about the way we live, where we live. I was driving my car, this is over 2 years ago, and I had two Protestant pastors from Dallas, Texas. I was showing them the flourishing of Jewish settlements. I was showing them how the visions of Jeremiah and Isaiah have come true before our eyes, how the land is flourishing. I was very proud. And I picked up a hitchhiker as we were driving. I had room in the car. I picked up a second hitchhiker. When I let the second hitchhiker out of the car, well, one of the pastors said to me, "Hanan, you're such a nice guy. You pick up hitchhikers. We don't do that in Texas." And I said to him, "Bob, I always pick up hitchhikers around here. We have a sense of brotherhood. We trust each other. We have a common mission. I pick up every person who puts out his finger." By the time I finished the sentence, I realized I was lying. I was lying to Bob, and I was lying to myself, because I do not pick up every person who puts out his finger. I pick up only Jews. And I'm not debating the question if it's right or wrong to pick up only Jews. I'm debating the question of how in God's name did I say and think that I pick up every person, because it's not true. What was going on in my consciousness that allowed me to think what I was thinking? Because I didn't see there was anyone else there. And I said to myself, and then I said out loud to Bob, "That's rotten. What's wrong with me? I have to do something about that." Another story. This happened only 11 months ago. There was a girl who grew up in my settlement, Alon Shvut, 27 years old. She's been there her whole life. She heard about the work that Ali and I and so many other Israelis and Palestinians are doing in Roots to bring the two sides together. We'll tell you about it a little bit later. She said she wants to join us. I said, "Come over to my house, I'll tell you what we're doing." She came over, she said, after hearing, "I want to volunteer," she said. I said, "Fantastic, take the phone number of Muhammad from Beit Umar and do this project together." And she said to me, "What is Beit Umar?" I'm going to stop for a few seconds and I'm going to tell you what Beit Umar is. Beit Umar is a thriving Palestinian city of 20,000 human beings that is a 5-minute car ride from where this girl spent the whole 27 years of her life. And she didn't ask me, where is Beit Umar? She asked me, what is Beit Umar? I think it's like having a conversation with someone in your university and they mention Greensboro and you say, "What's Greensboro?" How could that be? That is really rotten. But I'm not blaming that girl. I'm blaming me. I'm blaming us. I'm blaming the society, the culture, the environment in which we raise children not to see anything beyond the fence of their town or city or settlement. We are blind. And by the way, I'm talking from my side, but on the other side as well, we're all blind to the other. Now, let me give you some illustration of that blindness, what the situation is on the ground. We Palestinians and Israelis in Judea and Samaria, in the West Bank, we live right on top of each other. We drive in the same roads, for example. But when a Palestinian car approaches my car in the opposite lane, I know it's a Palestinian car because they have different color license plates. I look through the windshield and I see that someone's driving the car, but I have no idea what that person is, what makes him tick, where he's from. I don't know anything about Palestinians. And why? Do I not know anything? Because Palestinians and Israelis live in separate towns and villages. No one lives as a neighbor to the other in the same town or village. We speak different languages. We have different religions, different school systems, different economic systems. We have different municipalities. The people who pick up my garbage don't pick up their garbage. We have different legal systems. I live under Israeli law. They live under military Israeli law. Two completely different systems. The media are separate. Radio, television, newspaper, what I hear and see on the screen, on the television, not what they hear and see. Different newspapers, which means we really live in different worlds. We even live in different time zones. You'll say, how could that be? Israel and Palestine switch to and from daylight savings time in different months. So let's say I wanted to meet a Palestinian. No Israeli would want to meet one, but let's just say we found a place to meet. There's no place to meet. It's either their land or our land. But let's say they found a place and they wanted to meet, and they even set a time, 1 p.m., and they both got there on time. They might not see each other. That's the way we live. And when we have this situation, of course there's going to be ignorance. And of course there's going to be stereotypes. Of course there's going to be prejudice. Perhaps there's going to be hate. And then you add into it the violence on both sides. By the way, Israelis know almost nothing of the violence we do to them. And Palestinians know almost nothing of the violence they do to us. But both sides do violence to the other. When you add into that mix of stereotypes and ignorance the violence, well, you get a volatile cocktail that includes as well anger and fear. Anger and fear. In January 2014, my life changed. I got an invitation to meet Palestinians. I was in my living room. It was a Thursday afternoon. My wife saw me going towards the front door and putting my hand on the doorknob. She said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to meet Palestinians." She said, "Are you crazy? They'll kill you." She begged me not to go. And I walked out the front door, and my heart was pounding. I was afraid. I did not have to take the car. That's how close we lived to each other. I walked 20 minutes through the Palestinian orchards and vineyards around my home till I got to the field of Ali Abu Awwad. You saw in the film that field. I walked in the front gate, the middle gate, and I saw before my eyes something that cannot be. I saw a miracle. I saw about 15 Israelis and 15 Palestinians talking to each other. I walked in, and I saw a woman dressed in brown from head to toe. I can see only her face. She wasn't talking to anyone, so I walked up to her. I said hello in English, and she said back to me hello. We talked perhaps for 50 seconds, 40 seconds, don't know about what. Then I said to her, "I can't believe I'm talking to you." And she said to me, "I can't believe I'm talking to you because we don't talk to settlers." And we kept talking. And she introduced me to her son, Yazin, who's standing right next to her. He's 17 years old. I put out my hand to shake his hand, and I see that he's wearing a windbreaker that says on it in English, "Seeds of Peace." Now, I had no idea what Seeds of Peace is, but I knew one thing, that peace and Palestinians don't go together. So I said to myself, I guess he found the jacket on the floor. He doesn't know what it means. I said, "Yazin, what's this Seeds of Peace thing?" And he goes on to describe to me that just this past summer, he'd been in Maine, USA, in a camp called Seeds of Peace that takes kids from the conflict zone, Palestinians and Israelis, for a summer of recreation and reconciliation. And he tells me he has Israeli friends now on Facebook. He's in contact with them. And he says that he wants to devote some of his life to peace between these two nations. And I cannot believe what I'm hearing, because this just doesn't compute. Palestinians don't know anything about peace. So I thought. And then Yazin introduced me to his father. Jamal is standing right there. I introduced myself. Jamal introduces himself. And Jamal tells me they're from Beit Umar. That's the same Beit Umar I mentioned earlier. So I say, "You're from Beit Umar. I used to live in Karmei Tzur." Karmei Tzur, when we lived there, myself, my wife, and my 4 kids, 30 years ago, was a small settlement of 18 families, right abutting the fence of Beit Umar. Okay. So he hears that we used to be neighbors, in a certain sense. He takes out his smartphone to show me on Google Maps where he lives in Beit Umar. And I stare at his phone because I can't believe a Palestinian owns a smartphone. And he teaches me to use Google Maps. I didn't know. It was 2.5 years ago. I learned since then. And we see that Jamal lives on the fence, the other side of which is the house I and my family used to live in. I remember 30 years ago, you can hear, when the wind was blowing in the right direction, Palestinian voices wafting through the valley from their homes. You can hear in my living room. And now I'm meeting Jamal and his wife and one of his kids. I can't believe it. I just can't believe it. Now, you have no idea what was going through my mind when he talks about living in Beit Umar. Because when we used to live in Karmei Tzur, it was the beginning of the first Intifada, the first Palestinian uprising, 1987. There was violence. They used to throw rocks at us, their kids, over the fence, at our kids. And I, twice it was, came across a roadblock coming home from work in the middle of the night. I have to get out of the car and move those big boulders that are blocking my way home, all the while afraid I'm going to be ambushed from the side of the road from the people of Beit Umar. I know the people of Beit Umar, they're terrorists. And now I'm meeting the people of Beit Umar, and they're not at all what I would have expected. And then Jamal says to me the following, says, Hanan, you know, when our kids see someone who looks like you with the kippah, and the beard and the tzitzit hanging from his pants, well, our kids start to cry. I said, Jamal, what are you talking about? Why do they start to cry when they see someone who looks like me? And he didn't understand why I didn't understand. So finally he says to me, Hanan, you don't get it? All the people who look like you, they carry submachine guns and they kill our kids. And I didn't know what to say to him. I had no idea what he's talking about. So I just remained silent. And after a few seconds, I realized that this was a moment of blessing. Because for the first time in my life, I was experiencing how the other experiences me. And then I thought for another few seconds, and I suddenly realized, yeah, I get it. Because it's true, when we walk out in the fields with the Bible in one hand, and that deep sense of connectedness to the land and Jewish history, we very often have a submachine gun strapped on our shoulder because it's dangerous out there. So I said to Jamal, what do you want from us? We're afraid of you. He said, no, we're afraid of you. I talked to other people that afternoon. I met Palestinians, I met Israelis, and then as the sun was going down, there was about perhaps 10 people left from each side, 20 altogether. We sat in a circle. And Shul Yudelman, the Israeli convener, one of the Israeli conveners of that event, got up and tried to explain to the Palestinians who we Jewish Zionist settlers are, why we're here, what's our deep historical connection to this holy land. And after Shaul spoke, then Ali Abu Awwad, who's sitting right here, got up as the Palestinian convener of the event and the owner of the land we were sitting on, got up to talk to us and explain to us Jewish settlers who the Palestinians are, what it's like growing up in a refugee family in Beit Umar, how one manages under the rigors of Israeli occupation. Wait a second. Did I hear him say Israeli occupation? What is he talking about? I had heard those words, Israeli occupation, on the radio. In the European Union, they condemn Israel for the occupation. And United Nations, I'd read in the paper all the resolutions against the Israeli occupation. But never in my life had I sat face to face with a human being who used those words describing his own human lived experience. Now, I didn't know what he was talking about because I've never seen occupation. I live in the land that he experiences being occupied, but all I see is the fruition of the hopes and dreams and aspirations of the Jewish people. All I see is the coming alive of the Bible. All I see is the most righteous, most wonderful event that could ever have been. All I see is the building of a Jewish state to serve as a homeland and a haven for the refugees after the Holocaust. What could be more righteous and beautiful than that? And suddenly I hear that my triumph is in other people's tragedy. And suddenly I hear that my righteousness is in other people's suffering. And I have no idea how to process what I'm hearing. I didn't hear Ali say anything that I knew to be a lie, but it was just so foreign to me and so offensive and so other. And I walked home after that event very troubled, because I consider myself to be a serious person. I wasn't just going to ignore what I heard because it was uncomfortable, because it didn't fit with what I knew. I thought, and I thought a lot. And I went back and I met Ali again, and I talked to him. And I talked to Israelis who had met Palestinians. I tried to, how do I put together these two conflicting truths? And I want to tell you that there were literally months when I paced back and forth in my study, feeling nauseous, existentially nauseous with the inner conflict. I had to look down at the ground, and sometimes I felt I had to pick up my stomach and put it back in because I was so sick through the struggle. One day, I did something that I perhaps shouldn't have done. I went to Google, and I typed in Israeli occupation of Palestine. And I got to all these leftist websites that a good, orthodox, rightist Jew like me should never be caught dead reading. And I read them. I read everything. Perhaps you guys would recognize some of the names of the websites. I knew nothing. What I read, a good deal of what I read, sounded to me like borderline anti-Semitism. It was biting, it was critical, it was acerbic, it was even a little bit hateful. It was, to a large degree, directed against me. The shtetl is the source of all evil in the Middle East. But some of what I read penetrated my heart as true, even though it was an uncomfortable truth. And clearly what allowed me to open up my heart to a conflicting truth, a challenging truth, a truth that denied my own identity, was the fact that I had met human beings just a few weeks and months before. The human contact had opened up my heart. And I became a work in progress of struggling to put together two conflicting truths and identities. And I want to tell you two last things before I end this part of our presentation. The first thing is this. I understand the struggle I went through and the direction my soul has gone in terms of Judaism, because I'm a Jew. And I have some connection to the Jewish mystical tradition. In the past 200 years, the Jewish mystical tradition has been translated into the popular language in what's called the Hasidic movement. And the Hasidim say, the Hasidic movement says that there is a shard of truth everywhere. And every people, every nation, every language, every religion has a little bit of partial truth. And that our job as human beings is to go around the world and collect into our souls a little bit of partial truth from every place you go. And as we collect more and more partial truths into our soul and make them part of who we are, we create a kaleidoscope of partial truths in our soul. And in that way, we come closer and closer to God. Because God is defined in Jewish mysticism as the infinite collection of all the partial truths. There was a great rabbi who lived 2 generations ago who asked the following question. If it is the case that there is truth everywhere, then is there falsehood anywhere? If everything is true, then is anything false? And his answer was that this world is full of falsehood. Falsehood is partial truth masquerading as complete truth. If you think you have it all, that's when you have nothing. That's when you're on the way to darkness. And I realized that to the degree that for 33 years I've lived my life as if my truth is the only truth, and there's no other truth on that land, well, I've been living in falsehood. And my spiritual job, my mission has to be, as a human being and as a Jew, is to bring the Palestinian truth into my heart and find room for it to exist there together with my basic identity as a Jew, a Zionist, and a settler. That's a spiritual journey that I'm still on. The last thing I want to say is that I've learned recently in the past year, goaded on by Ali and many other Palestinian partners, that it's not enough to be on a spiritual journey. You have to do something about it. You have to live your life differently. And what that means is that when you come face to the fact that the way you're living your life is trampling the identity of another people and denying the dignity of another nation, then there has to be a better way to be a Jew, a Zionist, and a settler. How do I recalibrate my lifestyle? That's also a work in progress. I don't have any final answer. But there's one thing I can say, which is that the work Ali and I and hundreds of other Palestinians and Israelis are doing together to bring the two sides to see each other, that is my spiritual journey of learning how to live my life and live out my Judaism and Zionism in a more moral fashion that will not come at the expense of other people, but rather will find room for the other people, for the Palestinians, together with us Jews in that little sliver of land that we both call home. Thank you.
First of all, thank you. No, I need it for just a few minutes. Thank you for having us. Thank you for being here. You know, I always have problem with this map, okay? But I just want to give you an example. What does it feel? I'm standing here, and behind me there is a map of what? Of what? No, this is not a map of Palestine. This is not what's written there. What's written there is Israel. Do you know what does that feel for me as a Palestinian? I mean, this is my identity. This is where I was born. This is why my father, my grandfather was born. And this is the place where I belong. And this is the place where I want to make peace in with the people who lives over there. And I struggle always with people who defined their identity or the problem itself. It's all about definition. It's all about recognition. When Rabbi Hanan told his story, this is his truth. And I don't argue his truth. This is his truth. It's his. But I also have a truth. And from there, we need to learn how to bridge between two truths where they can fit in one place with dignity. This is peace for me. Otherwise, we will keep arguing forever. Because everyone is convinced and believe and practice his truth and will be ready to pay any price for his existence. Because both sides has nowhere else to go, and we don't want to go. This is where we belong. And this is just to share with you what does it feel to stand here speaking about reconciliation, and behind me there is a map called Israel. Just to give you a taste that every Palestinian is experiencing this in every single minute of his life. So now you can turn it off. My name is Ali Abu Awwad. I'm a Palestinian nonviolence activist. I was born as a refugee. I'm not gonna go to history. Not just because it's hard and painful, but I believe that people are stories. People are built of stories. So I'm willing to tell you my story, my personal story first, more than my national story. Because this is where we start as an activist to create a difference and to make a difference. Because it's about us. It's not about our history, and it's not just about our background. Because the two narratives of the both nations are such a painful one. So I'm not stuck there anymore. I was born as a refugee in 1948, And I opened my eyes and I realized that I'm carrying this heavy narrative on my shoulders, the narrative of the Palestinian people. And I was born to a very political family, especially from my mother's side. My mother was one of the leaders of PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. And she was such a respectful leader in my community. And she was arrested different times for her political activities against the Israeli occupation. And being in that home, for me, was the best education for hatred. Not because my mother taught me to hate, and not because I went to school to hate the Jews, but it's my environment and my life conditions. Living under a military occupation is like you become a shadow. Your movement is forbidden. Your dreams are forbidden. Your rights are forbidden. And you grow up, and all what you have day by day is just this desire to resist all of that as a human being, not as a terrorist. So when the first Intifada started, the first Palestinian uprising started in 1987, I went out to the street and I started throwing stones and participating in all of these events where the Palestinian has created in a national action to raise their voice for freedom. And then I was arrested by the Israeli army with my mother, and I went to prison carrying my hopes, carrying my broken dreams, because I always wanted to travel and study, and now I have to serve all of these 10 years in prison. This is what the court gave me. And I felt so broken. But I didn't imagine that going to prison was like going to one of the best universities that you can imagine. Because Palestinian political prisoners have succeeded to create universities inside the prisons, to turn them to become universities. A system that is very moral system based on five committees that has managed and led our life inside the prison. I served 4 years and I got the best education by Palestinians. Professors, lawyers, teachers were there. And after 3 years in prison, me and my mother wanted to visit each other. She was in another prison. And then Israel refused. So we decided to go for a hunger strike. A hunger strike of 17 days where we struggled just to see each other. And after these 17 days, we succeed to bring Israel to agree for us to meet. And that was the first time we celebrate this achievement of something from Israel. And then I start learning about nonviolence and nonviolent resistance. I start learning about Gandhi, Mandela, Martin Luther King. And then I realized that with my truthful act and just act and legitimate act to resist the occupation, with all of that, I was blinded to the best weapon to achieve my freedom, which is my humanity, not just my political right. And I was really transformed by experience, not by studying or by learning. And after that, when Oslo Peace Initiative has started between PLO and Israel, we were released. Many of us were released from prison. And we wanted really to have an independent, democratic Palestinian state that will live side by side with Israel. And we practiced that, especially ex-prisoners, that our mission was to build or to create the whole constitutions for the Palestinian Authority and for the Palestinian state. So we start creating security, development, economic, education. But our mission was challenged because it's impossible to create a state or to behave as citizens where you don't have a statehood. And this is what Israelis didn't understand. We were not able to fight violence or to stand against violence because of the continuation of the military occupation on the ground. I felt by arresting Palestinians who participated in violence, I felt that I'm a traitor, honestly. Then I resigned as an officer of security in the Palestinian Authority. I resigned. And I was sure that this process of peace will collapse because it didn't speak about the Palestinians. It didn't engage them to have their rights in harmony of their life. Peace is not just to sign a paper in the White House. Peace is not to give a nice speech in the United Nations. Peace is not to come up with good statements about harmony and humanity. Peace is when people's rights are in harmony of their life. This is peace. Peace for Palestinians is changing of life conditions, is not just changing of feelings or ideas. This is peace for us. So finally, in 2000, the whole process has collapsed. And before that, many attacks, suicide bombers, and all what you heard that happened. And people become so desperate from both sides. And they lost their hope in anything, in any change. But the majority of both nations, the majority of the Palestinians also, were not engaged directly in violence against Israelis. But they live with suffering and anger. That's my community. So in 2000, after 2-3 months of the second intifada, I was badly wounded in my knee by a settler who was driving in the street and shooting people. And these events happened. It's not fiction. This is what we face sometimes. And while I was having my medical treatment, I received the news that my older brother Yusuf was stopped by a group of Israeli soldiers in the entrance of my village, my town, Beit Ummar, and very violently murdered. So what do you do? I mean, as a human being, what do you do after all what I have been through? Now there is a price that I cannot take anymore. The price of losing someone, losing my best friend and my best brother. And my brother didn't die because he was a thief, because he was a terrorist, not in a car accident. Someone in purpose shot my brother 70 meters from his head and killed him. Then the only thing that you think about is revenge. Revenge is legitimate, is a normal action for any victim, and just also. And if it's about justice, is it about punishment? That the one who killed my brother this way has to be punished? Or someone of his nation has to pay the price that my mother paid? And then what is justice is? Justice, in my opinion, justice cannot be created by punishment. And I will tell you why. The only just solution that I can imagine for this act, for losing my brother, is to have him back. That's justice for me. But he will never come back, which means that there is no justice. And even I remember while I was struggling with myself, remembering my study in the prison, when I learned about Malcolm X saying that justice is just us. Justice is us. It's not someone act that we expect toward us. It's the step that we take toward justice. It's very complex. It's very hard. It's even hard to explain to you that struggle inside. It's not a political struggle. It's not just a political struggle. It's not ideological. It's not personal. It's not psychological. It's much deeper than that. Because nothing worth such a price. Nothing. So I was stuck, struggling between revenge and nothing, actually. Not reconciliation. Especially if you live there, nothing help you to reconcile, because my pain didn't stop there. This pain is not a history. I still face these soldiers every day. I still live under this military system every day. And I have to reconcile it. How can I be able to reconcile this as long as this killer is maybe still moving with a weapon and no one put him to justice? This is something that people have to understand if we are willing to create a real reconciliation on the ground and not to lie on ourselves. Because I don't want to be broken in the future. I want to be part of a process that will lead to a real solution. And this is one of the challenges that we face every day. The conditions of our environment and the acts by both sides. So finally, in 2001, my mother agreed to receive a group of bereaved Israeli parents, people who have lost someone in the conflict. And for me, that was a huge surprise that my mother agreed to host Israelis in my home. They killed my brother, they occupy me, they tell me to be a refugee, and they still controlling me. What she has to do with them? And it was a surprise for me because my mother considered as a hero for BLO. And finally, to make it very short, 2001, when I saw these people and I met them in my home, that was the first time in my life to see an Israeli crying, to see a mother who have lost a son like my mother, sitting with respect, saying sorry. Israelis don't say sorry. Saying sorry and standing for our rights with us. And these are the people who paid the highest price in the conflict. I was totally transformed. And I thought to myself, if these people can understand my rights and my pain and stand with me to change all of that, so everyone can. And my life has changed. I become an activist, touring the whole world with this story and doing many things on the ground about nonviolence. One of them is Roots. Roots has founded by me and other Israeli settlers, and I was not expecting when I came to that piece of land that belonged to my family, and I wanted to challenge the situation because the area where we live is a very hot spot. I wanted to create that nonviolence center to prove that we can act nonviolently everywhere. But I also wanted to challenge the peace movement. Because in general, lefties talk to lefties. We talk to the convinced. It's like dialoguing with ourselves. But what about the people who disagree with us? This is where the conflict is. You don't make peace between friends. You make peace between enemies. You don't dialogue, whether it's a political dialogue or any other dialogue, to solve conflict with people that you don't have conflict with. And I become tired of many peace organizations, honestly. Because I'm not willing to go in these nice peace cafes in Tel Aviv, where Israelis, they are my friends, okay, will tell me that, Ali, we are good, we stand for your rights, we are against the occupation, but they never show up in the West Bank, where I suffer. And I always say that Jewish people cannot be divided around opinions. The settlers are bad and the Tel Avivis are good. This will not lead, or this will not convince us as a Palestinian that they have no responsibility. Then I came to that land and I created Roots with my partners, and this is not a comfortable place. I promise you, settlers are not Mandelas, as you know. But I think dialogue is all about having a secure place for argument. Dialogue is being able to put yourself in the most hard, challenging area and to come up with solution that can speak about people identity and people needs and people truth. And finally, I realized that not all the Palestinians and not all the Israelis will do actions together. There is also a national responsibility by both sides to take towards solution. And also, we are not equal in the ground by life conditions. What can serve peace in Israel is not exactly the same thing that can serve peace in the Haisha refugee camp in Beit Lahem. The needs for peace are different. If Israelis, allow me to sit, I have a sciatica which bothers me a lot. The needs for peace are different. If Israelis want to be secure, this is peace for them, to be recognized and secure. Palestinians need much more than that. we need to relive, to live again. So how can you target these problems and bring both communities to peace? In my opinion, Palestinians and my people has to adopt nonviolence as an identity, first of all. Why? Because we cannot act peacefully without having a framework will guarantee a place for this anger to come out in a non-violence way. Why? Because part of peace for us is to resist the occupation. This is the truth. I don't want to lie on myself. I don't want to lie on you or on my partners. That's the truth. Any peace process will not guarantee non-violent resistance. Palestinians will not adopt it. And that's why we created, not roots, not Israelis, we as Palestinian and Palestinian activists, has created تغيير in Arabic, change in English. This is the name of our national nonviolence movement. Because on the other hand, Israelis and Jews all over want to see a Palestinian nonviolent national movement. This will move them toward solution. This will bring back trust of the Palestinian. This will help to overcome the Jewish fear. I always say that the Jewish fear is our biggest enemy. So overcoming that fear is a step to freedom for us. That's one of the values of our struggle. On the other hand, to guarantee enough development in the ground where Palestinians will start realizing that by non-violence we develop our life. It's not just about going to these nice 5-star peace conferences where we hug each other and eat hummus. It's about a struggle daily on the ground where we will develop our identity and we will tell also the occupation that we will not be your victims. I'm not a victim anymore. And I know, and I always say that, the one who killed my brother in this horrible way wanted to bury my humanity in the same grave. My willing to live, to break me down. And my best revenge is to tell him that I will not be your victim and I will be part of this framework that will guarantee for both truths, for the two nations to live with dignity. That's my revenge. And I know that the worst enemy against the occupation is the nonviolent struggle. Because all of the military acts are based on fear or our violence actions. So the minute that we stop acting violently, the minute that the system will be evacuated. And it's not about the right to resist or not. Even the international law has guaranteed this right for us. But it's about, do you want to be right or do you want to succeed? Because both sides are right. And with this rightness, we keep dying every year and every day. And with this competition of suffering, we are stuck. Who suffers more? I promise you, we have 1 million legitimate reason to act not violently, not non-violently, violently. And we can legitimize this. But this is endless. So you don't have to be Mandela to realize that. Why? Because there is one fact. This is the only place that we can exist as Jews, as Muslims, as Christians, as Palestinians and Israelis. We have to act regarding that fact. The minute that this will register in our mind, I'm sure that the price and the painful price of peace will be much cheaper than the price of war. Will be acceptable for us to pay the price of peace, because we will realize that the price of war is such a horrible one. Thank you.